Marcus had always been different from the other shepherds in the village of Green Hollow. While his fellow herders spoke only of sheep prices and weather patterns, Marcus found himself drawn to the whispered stories of the old forest that bordered their valley. The ancient woods stretched beyond the horizon, its canopy so thick that sunlight barely touched the forest floor even at midday. The 24-year-old shepherd possessed an unusual gift that he kept hidden from his neighbors. Animals seemed to understand him in ways that defied explanation. His sheep followed him without the need for a dog, and wild creatures would approach him fearlessly when he ventured near the forest edge. His grandmother, the only person who knew of his ability, had warned him to keep it secret before she passed away 3 winters ago. "There are powers in those woods that haven't forgotten the old ways," she had whispered on her deathbed. "If they sense what you can do, they might take interest. And their interest, dear boy, is not always a blessing." Marcus lived alone in a small stone cottage at the edge of the village, inheriting both the home and his flock from his grandmother. His days followed a simple rhythm, leading his sheep to graze in the meadows, ensuring their safety, and returning home before dusk. The villagers respected his skill with livestock, though they found his quiet nature somewhat peculiar. One autumn morning, as golden leaves danced in the crisp air, Marcus noticed something troubling. 3 of his best ewes had wandered off during the night, despite his careful securing of the pen. Their tracks led straight toward the forbidden forest, disappearing at the tree line where the soft earth gave way to moss-covered stones. The village elder, a stern man named Aldrich, had made it clear to all residents that the forest was off-limits. "Strange things happen to those who enter uninvited," he would say during his monthly addresses. "Travelers vanish, strange lights appear at night, and sometimes people return, changed." But Marcus couldn't abandon his sheep. They were his livelihood, and, more importantly, he felt responsible for their safety. Against every warning he had ever received, he gathered his walking staff, filled his leather pouch with bread and dried meat, and set off toward the tree line as the morning mist began to lift. The forest was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The moment he crossed the threshold between meadow and woodland, the world seemed to shift around him. The air grew thicker, carrying scents of flowers that bloomed nowhere else and herbs he couldn't identify. Ancient oak and pine trees towered overhead, their branches intertwining to form a natural cathedral. Birdsong echoed from every direction, but these weren't the familiar calls of meadowlarks or sparrows. These melodies were more complex, almost like conversations in a language he couldn't understand. Squirrels watched him from the branches above, their dark eyes unusually intelligent and alert. As Marcus followed the faint trail left by his sheep, he noticed that the forest seemed to be leading him deeper into its heart. Paths appeared where none had existed moments before, and fallen logs shifted slightly to create easier passage. At first, he attributed these changes to his imagination, but, as the day wore on, he could no longer deny that something was guiding his steps. By late afternoon, he had traveled farther than seemed possible. The forest around him had grown even more magnificent, with trees so massive that it would take 20 men holding hands to encircle their trunks. Flowers glowed with their own inner light, and streams of crystal-clear water sang as they flowed over polished stones. It was beside one such stream that Marcus first saw her. She stood in a clearing where shafts of golden sunlight penetrated the canopy, illuminating her figure like a vision from an ancient tale. At first glance, she appeared to be a young woman of extraordinary beauty, perhaps 20 years of age, with long auburn hair that seemed to move with its own wind. Her dress appeared to be woven from living vines and flower petals, shifting and changing color as she moved. But Marcus's special sight allowed him to see beyond the human appearance. Around her, the air shimmered with an otherworldly energy, and he could sense the immense power that flowed through her like a river of starlight. Small woodland creatures gathered at her feet, rabbits, deer, foxes, and birds of every description, all completely at peace in her presence. When she turned to face him, her eyes held the deep green of summer forests and the wisdom of countless seasons. Her smile was warm but tinged with something Marcus couldn't quite identify, perhaps amusement, or maybe a touch of loneliness. "Welcome, Marcus of Green Hollow," she said, her voice carrying the sound of wind through leaves and water over stones. "I have been waiting for you to find the courage to enter my domain." Marcus felt his heart racing, but not from fear. Despite her obvious supernatural nature, he felt drawn to her in a way that defied logic. "How do you know my name?" he managed to ask. "I know many things about you," she replied, stepping closer. "I know that you speak with the creatures of field and forest. I know that you carry your grandmother's wisdom in your heart. And I know that you have come seeking your lost sheep." She gestured toward a grove of apple trees behind her, where Marcus was relieved to see his 3 ewes grazing contentedly on grass that sparkled with morning dew, despite the late hour of the day. "You may call me Sylvia," she continued. "I am what your people would call a woodland deity, though such titles matter little in the grand tapestry of existence. What matters is that you have entered my realm with a pure heart and genuine concern for those in your care." Marcus found himself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. There was something about Sylvia's presence that reminded him of his grandmother's gentle wisdom, combined with a vitality that seemed to make the very air around them more alive. "Your sheep are safe," Sylvia assured him. "They were drawn here by the same force that eventually brought you. The forest has been watching you, Marcus, just as I have. We have been curious about the young shepherd who tends his flock with such devotion and speaks to animals in their own language." As they talked, Marcus learned that Sylvia was the guardian of this ancient woodland, charged with maintaining the balance between the natural world and the encroaching influence of human civilization. She had lived here for countless centuries, watching over the forest's inhabitants and protecting them from those who would do harm. "But it grows lonely," she admitted as they sat beside the singing stream, watching his sheep graze in the eternal twilight of the grove. "The old ways are fading, and fewer people remember that the forest is alive with its own consciousness and purpose." Marcus found himself opening up to her in ways he had never done with another living soul. He told her about his gift with animals, his love for the peaceful life of a shepherd, and his secret dreams of finding someone who would understand his connection to the natural world. As the day passed, though time seemed to move differently in this enchanted place, Marcus realized that he was falling under Sylvia's spell. But it wasn't magic that drew him to her, it was the recognition of a kindred spirit, someone who valued the same things he did and understood the language of growing things. When evening finally approached, Sylvia stood and brushed flower petals from her ever-changing dress. "You must return to your village," she said softly. "Your sheep will follow you home safely, and no harm will come to you on the journey." Marcus felt a pang of disappointment so sharp it surprised him. "Will I see you again?" Sylvia's smile held secrets and promises. "The forest has many needs, Marcus of Greenhollow. Perhaps, if you truly wish it, our paths will cross again." As she spoke, the world around them began to shift and change. The trees seemed to step aside, creating a clear path that led directly back toward the village. His 3 sheep appeared at his side, looking perfectly content and healthy. Marcus wanted to say more, to express the profound impact this encounter had made on his heart, but words seemed inadequate. Instead, he bowed deeply to Sylvia, a gesture that felt natural and right. "Until we meet again," he said simply. "Until then," she replied, and her voice seemed to echo from every tree and flower in the forest. As Marcus led his sheep back toward Greenhollow, he turned once to look back at the clearing. Sylvia stood watching him go, her figure gradually fading into the twilight until she became one with the forest itself. The journey home took only an hour, though Marcus was certain he had traveled much farther into the woodland. When he emerged from the tree line, the familiar lights of his village glowed warmly in the distance, and he could hear the evening bells calling people to their suppers. But everything had changed for Marcus. In his heart, he carried the memory of eyes like summer forests and a voice like wind through leaves. The mundane world of village life suddenly felt small and colorless compared to the vibrant realm he had just experienced. That night, as he settled his sheep into their pen and secured the gate, Marcus found himself gazing toward the dark outline of the forest against the starlit sky. Somewhere in those depths, Sylvia was continuing her ancient watch over the woodland realm. He had no way of knowing that his life was about to become infinitely more complicated, or that the lonely deity had found in him something she had been searching for across centuries of solitude. The bond between the woodland guardian and her shepherd had been forged, and neither the mortal world nor the supernatural realm would remain unchanged by what was to come. The weeks following Marcus's encounter with Sylvia passed in a blur of restless days and sleepless nights. He found himself drawn to the forest edge every morning, hoping to catch a glimpse of the woodland deity or perhaps receive some sign that their meeting had been more than an elaborate dream. His sheep seemed to sense his distraction, gathering closer to him during their daily grazing as if offering comfort. The villagers of Green Hollow began to notice changes in their quiet shepherd. Marcus had always been reserved, but now he seemed to exist in two worlds at once, present in body but with his mind clearly elsewhere. When asked about his distracted state, he would simply smile and claim he was thinking about improvements to his flock's care. 3 weeks after his first venture into the forbidden forest, Marcus was awakened before dawn by an urgent bleating from his sheep pen. Rushing outside in his nightclothes, he discovered that his entire flock was pressed against the gate facing the woodland, their eyes wide with what appeared to be anticipation rather than fear. In the pre-dawn bloom, a figure emerged from the tree line. Marcus's heart leaped as he recognized Sylvia, though she appeared different from their first meeting. Her usual dress of living vines and flowers had been replaced by a simple brown cloak that made her look almost human. Almost, but not quite. The otherworldly grace of her movement and the faint luminescence that seemed to emanate from her skin marked her as something far more than mortal. "Marcus," she called softly, her voice carrying easily across the meadow. "I have need of your help." Without hesitation, Marcus opened the gate and allowed his sheep to flow out toward the forest. To his amazement, they moved in perfect formation, as if responding to an unheard command. Sylvia smiled at their eager approach, and Marcus watched in wonder as she greeted each animal individually, her hands glowing faintly as she touched their heads. "There is trouble in the deep forest," she explained as Marcus joined her. "A darkness has taken root in the heart of my domain, something that threatens the balance I have maintained for centuries. I cannot face this alone." Marcus felt a mixture of honor and terror at being asked to help such a powerful being. "What kind of darkness?" he asked, falling into step beside her as they followed his flock into the woodland. "A blight that consumes life itself," Sylvia replied, her usual serene expression clouded with worry. "It began small, affecting only a few plants in the deepest part of the forest. But it spreads daily, leaving nothing but ash and shadow in its wake. The animals flee before it, and even my power seems insufficient to halt its advance." As they traveled deeper into the forest than Marcus had gone before, he began to see signs of the devastation Sylvia described. Trees that should have been vibrant with autumn colors stood bare and lifeless, their branches brittle and black. The very air in these areas felt cold and empty, devoid of the life energy that permeated the rest of the woodland. "How can I possibly help you with something like this?" Marcus asked, genuinely bewildered. "I'm just a shepherd with a small talent for understanding animals." Sylvia stopped walking and turned to face him, her green eyes intense with purpose. "You underestimate yourself, Marcus. Your gift is not small, it is a bridge between the human world and the natural realm. That connection may be the key to understanding what we face." They continued their journey until they reached the edge of a vast clearing that Marcus was certain hadn't existed during his previous visit to the forest. At its center stood something that made his stomach turn with instinctive revulsion. A twisted tree, its bark black as midnight and its branches reaching skyward like grasping claws, pulsed with a sickly purple light. Around the tree, the ground was cracked and barren, radiating outward in concentric circles of increasing devastation. Nothing grew within 100 yards of the corrupted oak, and the silence in this area was absolute, no birdsong, no rustling of leaves, not even the whisper of wind through branches. "It appeared 3 moons ago," Sylvia whispered, her voice heavy with grief. "Each day it grows stronger, and each day more of my forest dies." Marcus studied the scene with both his normal vision and his special sight. What he saw made him step back in alarm. The tree wasn't just corrupted, it was hungry. Tendrils of dark energy stretched out from its roots, seeking any source of life to consume. But more disturbing was what he sensed beneath the surface. "There's something trapped inside," he said suddenly. "Something that doesn't belong there." Sylvia's eyes widened with surprise and hope. "You can sense it?" "I knew there was more to this blight than simple corruption, but I couldn't determine its source." Marcus approached the edge of the dead zone cautiously, his special sight probing deeper. What he discovered chilled him to the bone. Deep within the twisted tree's trunk, he could sense a presence, ancient, powerful, and filled with rage that bordered on madness. "It's a spirit of some kind," he reported, backing away from the unnatural heat that emanated from the corrupted ground. Something very old and very angry. It feels imprisoned. Over the following days, Marcus and Sylvia worked together to understand the nature of their enemy. She taught him to extend his supernatural sight beyond animals to perceive the flow of life energy itself, while he shared his growing insights about the trapped entity within the tree. Their investigation revealed a tragic story that stretched back centuries. The corrupted oak had once been the prison of Malachar, a powerful spirit of decay and endings who had been bound there by Sylvia's predecessor as guardian of the forest. Over the long years of his imprisonment, Malachar's hatred had festered and grown, gradually weakening the magical bonds that held him. The binding was never meant to last forever, Sylvia admitted as they sat beside a stream well away from the blight zone. It was intended as a temporary solution while a permanent remedy was found. But my predecessor died before completing the task, and the knowledge of how to safely banish Malachar was lost. Marcus found himself studying Sylvia's face in the dappled sunlight, noting the way sorrow and determination warred in her expression. Over their days of working together, he had come to understand that her role as forest guardian was both a blessing and a burden. The power to protect came with the weight of enormous responsibility, and she bore that weight with grace that both humbled and inspired him. What happens if he breaks free completely? Marcus asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. The blight will spread beyond the forest, Sylvia replied quietly. Malachar is a force of ending. He will not rest until all growing things within his reach have been reduced to ash. Your village, the surrounding farmlands, eventually entire kingdoms could fall to his hunger. The magnitude of the threat left Marcus reeling. He was just one man with a modest gift for animal communication, facing an entity that could destroy everything he had ever known or loved. But, as he looked at Sylvia's determined face, he realized that retreat was not an option. There must be something we can do, he said firmly. Some way to strengthen the binding or find a new prison for him. Sylvia's expression brightened with the first hope he had seen from her in days. There may be. The old texts speak of a ritual that can transfer the essence of imprisonment from a failing vessel to a new one. But it requires a willing sacrifice. Someone must take Malachar's corruption into themselves and carry it away from the forest. Then, we'll find another way, Marcus said immediately, recognizing the direction of her thoughts. You're not sacrificing yourself to save the forest. It may be the only solution, Sylvia protested. I am bound to this land, my essence is intertwined with every tree and flower. If the forest dies, I die anyway. But Marcus had already begun formulating a different plan. His unique ability to bridge the gap between human and natural worlds might offer a solution that didn't require Sylvia's destruction. If he could somehow communicate with Malachar directly, perhaps he could find a way to satisfy the entity's rage without allowing him to destroy the forest. The idea was dangerous beyond measure, but, as Marcus watched his sheep grazing peacefully in a meadow that might soon be consumed by shadow, he knew he had to try. That night, as Sylvia rested in a grove of protective willows that responded to her presence by growing into a natural shelter, Marcus made his way back to the edge of the blight zone. The corrupted tree pulsed more violently in the darkness, its purple glow casting airy shadows across the dead ground. Taking a deep breath, Marcus extended his consciousness toward the imprisoned spirit, using techniques Sylvia had taught him but pushing them far beyond their intended limits. The contact was like grasping a red-hot coal with his bare hands. Malachar's rage and madness crashed against his mind with overwhelming force. But Marcus held on, projecting thoughts of peace and understanding toward the entity. Gradually, beneath the layers of anger and corruption, he sensed something else, a profound loneliness that resonated with his own experiences as an outsider in his village. Why do you rage so? Marcus asked, the words spoken aloud but carried by his supernatural perception directly to Malachar's consciousness. The response nearly shattered his mind. Centuries of isolation and fury slammed into him like a physical blow, but underneath the chaos he heard something that might have been an answer. Forgotten, betrayed, promise broken. Marcus realized that Malachar's imprisonment had been accompanied by a promise, some agreement that had been violated, turning the entity's natural purpose toward destruction and revenge. If he could discover what that promise had been and find a way to honor it, perhaps the spirit could be convinced to leave the forest voluntarily. When he finally broke the connection and staggered back from the dead zone. Marcus found Sylvia waiting for him, her face pale with worry and anger. "What were you thinking?" she demanded, catching him as he stumbled. "That connection could have killed you, or worse, it could have given Malachar access to your mind." "I had to try," Marcus gasped, still reeling from the psychic contact. "Sylvia, I don't think he was always a destroyer. Something was done to him, some promise was broken. If we can find out what happened, maybe we can find a solution that doesn't require either of us to die." As dawn broke over the forest, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that seemed to mock the darkness spreading at the woodland's heart, Marcus and Sylvia began planning their next move. The fate of the forest, and possibly the entire region, hung in the balance, but, for the first time since the crisis began, they had a glimmer of hope. Neither of them could have predicted that their quest for answers would lead them to truths that would forever change not only their understanding of the forest's history, but the very nature of their relationship with each other. The ancient library hidden beneath the roots of the great mother oak held secrets that had been forgotten by both human and supernatural worlds. Sylvia had revealed its existence reluctantly, explaining that the underground chamber contained the accumulated knowledge of every forest guardian who had come before her. As Marcus descended the spiral staircase carved from living wood, he marveled at the way bioluminescent fungi provided gentle illumination for the vast collection of scrolls, books, and carved tablets that lined the walls. The air itself seemed thick with wisdom accumulated over millennia. "The records of Malachar's original binding should be somewhere in the eastern section," Sylvia said, leading him through corridors lined with shelves that stretched higher than the eye could follow. "My predecessor left detailed accounts of all major magical workings performed in the forest." Their search took the better part of the day, but eventually they located a series of stone tablets carved with symbols that hurt Marcus's eyes to look at directly. Sylvia's face grew increasingly troubled as she translated the ancient text, her expression darkening with each revelation. "This is worse than I feared," she said finally, setting down the last tablet with hands that trembled slightly. "Malachar wasn't always a spirit of decay and destruction. He was once a guardian of transitions, a being who helped souls pass peacefully from life to death and guided the natural cycle of growth and renewal." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "What changed him?" "Betrayal," Sylvia replied bitterly. "The previous forest guardian, a woman named Thessarian, made a pact with Malachar 5 centuries ago. The forest was dying from a plague that turned trees to stone, and she needed his power over endings to stop the corruption before it spread to the human lands. According to the records, Malachar had agreed to help, but only under specific conditions. He would use his power to end the plague and cleanse the forest, but afterward he was to be granted passage to the realm of eternal rest that all spirits eventually sought. Thessarian had sworn a binding oath to facilitate this transition once the forest was saved. But she broke her word, Marcus said, understanding beginning to dawn in his mind. The plague was stopped, but instead of honoring her agreement, Thessarian imprisoned Malachar in the oak tree. She claimed it was necessary to prevent him from seeking vengeance for the deception, but the truth was simpler: she couldn't bear to lose the power that came from having such a potent spirit bound to the forest. The injustice of it made Marcus's stomach turn. No wonder Malachar's rage had festered over the centuries, growing stronger until it finally began to corrupt the very prison that held him. The spirit wasn't evil, he was a victim of broken promises and magical enslavement. "So how do we fix this?" Marcus asked. "How do we honor a 500-year-old promise?" Sylvia was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the carved stone as she considered their options. "The original ritual of passage still exists," she said finally. "But it requires the forest guardian to willingly relinquish her claim on Malachar and guide him to the threshold between worlds." "That doesn't sound so difficult," Marcus said hopefully. "The process will drain all of my power," Sylvia explained quietly. "To open a gateway to the realm of eternal rest requires me to pour my life force into the working. I would survive, but I would no longer be a guardian. The forest would need to find a new protector, and I would become ordinary." Marcus stared at her in shock. "You would give up your immortality and your connection to the forest? To right an ancient wrong and save the woodland from Malachar's corruption?" "Yes." Her voice was firm, but Marcus could see the pain the decision caused her. The forest wasn't just her responsibility, it was part of her very identity. That night, as they camped in a grove near the library, Marcus found himself unable to sleep. He watched Sylvia as she communed with the trees around their campsite, her hands glowing softly as she shared her energy with plants that had been damaged by the spreading blight. The love she felt for every living thing in the forest was evident in every gesture. "There has to be another way," he said suddenly, breaking the peaceful silence. Sylvia looked up from the injured sapling she had been tending. "Marcus, we've been through all the options. The ritual of passage is the only way to free Malachar without allowing him to destroy everything in his path." "What if someone else performed the ritual?" Marcus asked. "What if I could somehow take your place?" "That's impossible," Sylvia replied immediately. "The ritual requires a deep connection to the forest's life force, something that takes centuries to develop. Even with your gift for communicating with nature, you lack the necessary power." But Marcus had been thinking about this problem all day, and a crazy idea had begun to form in his mind. "What if we combined our abilities? You said yourself that my talent for bridging human and supernatural worlds is unique. What if that bridge could work both ways?" Sylvia's eyes widened as she began to understand what he was proposing. "You want to create a temporary link between us, to share the burden of the ritual?" "Exactly. You provide the raw power, and I provide the connection to guide Malachar to where he needs to go. Together, we might be able to perform the working without either of us having to sacrifice everything." The more they discussed the possibility, the more feasible it seemed. Marcus's ability to communicate across the boundaries between different forms of consciousness could potentially allow him to serve as a conduit for Sylvia's power while maintaining his own separate identity. It would be dangerous, the magical energies involved could easily overwhelm a mortal mind, but it offered hope for a solution that didn't require devastating loss. They spent the next 2 days preparing for the ritual, studying the ancient texts and practicing the complex magical techniques required. Sylvia taught Marcus to perceive and manipulate the flows of life energy that connected all living things, while he showed her how to extend her consciousness beyond the familiar boundaries of the forest. On the morning of the third day, they made their way to the blight zone. The corruption had spread noticeably since their last visit, and the twisted oak now pulsed with an angry red light that seemed to pierce straight through to the soul. Malachar's prison was clearly failing, they had perhaps hours before he broke free completely. Marcus and Sylvia took their positions on opposite sides of the dead zone, their preparations complete. The sheep had been safely relocated to a distant meadow under the protection of woodland creatures loyal to Sylvia, ensuring they wouldn't be caught in the magical working. "Are you ready?" Sylvia called across the barren ground. Marcus nodded, though his heart was pounding with fear and anticipation. "Let's bring him home." The ritual began with Sylvia drawing power from every tree, flower, and blade of grass in the forest. Marcus could feel the enormous energies flowing toward her, turning her into a beacon of pure life force that blazed like a star in his supernatural sight. When the accumulation reached its peak, she began channeling the power toward him across the psychic link they had forged. The sensation was indescribable, like being struck by lightning while simultaneously being embraced by every warm summer day that had ever existed. Marcus felt his consciousness expand far beyond the boundaries of his mortal form, touching the edges of realms he had never imagined. Using this borrowed power, he reached out to Malachar with a gentleness that the ancient spirit hadn't experienced in centuries. Instead of the rage and corruption he expected to encounter, Marcus found himself face to face with a being consumed by grief and loneliness. "The promise will be kept," Marcus said, his voice carrying across dimensions. "The debt will be paid. You are free to go home." For a moment, Malachar's fury wavered, replaced by something that might have been hope. "Home," the spirit whispered, the word carrying the weight of 5 centuries of imprisonment. "Home," Marcus confirmed, and began the process of opening the gateway to eternal rest. The working required every ounce of power that Sylvia could channel and all of Marcus's skill at bridging different realms of existence. Reality bent and twisted around them as they forced open a doorway to a place that existed beyond time and space. The corrupted oak began to writhe and scream as Malachar's essence was gradually drawn out of his prison toward the beckoning portal. But, as the spirit's form became visible, a towering figure of shadow and starlight that radiated both terrible power and profound sadness, something unexpected happened. Instead of immediately rushing toward freedom, Malachar paused to look back at Marcus and Sylvia. "You honor the old ways," he said, his voice like wine through autumn leaves. "The guardian who imprisoned me could have done this at any time, but chose power over justice. You choose differently." With a gesture, Malachar reached out and touched the blighted ground around his former prison. Wherever his shadow fell, the corruption began to reverse itself. Dead soil became rich and fertile, withered plants burst into new growth, and the twisted oak straightened and bloomed with flowers out of season. "A gift," Malachar explained, "for those who keep their promises." Then, he stepped through the portal Marcus had opened, and was gone. The gateway collapsed behind him, leaving only a sense of profound peace and the restored clearing where moments before there had been only death and decay. Marcus collapsed to his knees, the borrowed power flowing back to Sylvia as their psychic link dissolved. She rushed to his side, her own face pale from the enormous expenditure of energy, but her eyes bright with triumph and relief. "We did it," she breathed, helping him to his feet. "The forest is safe." Around them, the woodland was already beginning to celebrate. Birds that had fled the blight returned in great flocks, filling the air with joyous song. Flowers bloomed spontaneously along every path, and the very air seemed to sparkle with renewed vitality. In the weeks that followed, Marcus discovered that his experience during the ritual had permanently changed him. His ability to communicate with animals had expanded to include all forms of life, and he could now perceive the flow of natural energies that connected every living thing. Sylvia, meanwhile, found that sharing her power during the working had actually strengthened rather than depleted her connection to the forest. But the most significant change was in their relationship with each other. The psychic link they had forged to save Malachar had created a permanent bond between them, allowing them to share thoughts, emotions, and experiences in ways that transcended normal understanding. As autumn gave way to winter, Marcus made a decision that surprised no one who had witnessed his transformation. He moved his cottage to the edge of the forest, where he could serve as a bridge between the human village and Sylvia's supernatural realm. His sheep grazed in meadows blessed by ancient magic, and his days were spent helping both communities understand and respect each other. The villagers of Green Hollow gradually overcame their fear of the forest, guided by Marcus's gentle explanations and Sylvia's willingness to help with their problems. Crops grew more abundantly, animals remained healthier, and children began learning the old stories that connected them to the natural world. And, in the heart of the woodland, where a blighted oak had once stood as a monument to broken promises, a new tree grew. Its branches reached toward both earth and sky, and, in its shade, a shepherd and a forest guardian worked together to heal the ancient wounds between their two worlds. The tree bore fruit that tasted of starlight and dreams, and its roots ran deep into soil that had been nourished by justice finally served and promises finally kept. Under its protection, love bloomed between beings who had been meant for each other across the boundaries of mortal and immortal worlds, proving that some bonds are strong enough to bridge any gap. Marcus often reflected on how a simple search for lost sheep had led him to find not only his true calling, but also the other half of his soul. The Woodland Deity and her shepherd had discovered that the greatest magic of all was not in ancient rituals or supernatural powers, but in the willingness to sacrifice for others and the courage to honor one's word, no matter the cost. Their story became legend in the surrounding lands, told around winter fires as an example of how love and justice could overcome even the darkest corruption. And, sometimes, on nights when the moon was full and the forest sang with its own mysterious music, travelers would glimpse two figures walking hand in hand among the trees,